Meng Haoran, climbing Mount Xian with friends. In the world of men, nothing stays unchanged. From ancient times until today, there's always flux. But rivers and mountains never lose their splendor. Like those who came before, we're moved to visit them. Past rapids, fish in shallows near a bridge. A cold sky, the depths of Yunmen's swamp. To the stone monument for the Duke of Yang. Reading the inscription, our sleeves are wet with tears. So here we get, we're going back to the poems by Meng Haoran after that short return to Wang Wei because of the mistake that I mentioned recently. Yeah, I had skipped one of Wang Wei's poems, as you'll remember. So back to Meng Haoran, and here we have a poem that we have just read, and that we could say quite squarely fits into Meng Haoran's typical poems. Remember, Meng Haoran is usually a retired and a landscape type of poet. This poem is a poem about an excursion. The title says it, climbing Mount Xian with friends. Now, Mount Xian was in the outskirts, I believe, of the city of Xiangyang, of which we've talked about precisely in the Wang Wei poem that we had skipped, about to set sail on the Han River. In that poem, Wang Wei was in the city of Xiangyang, and he was about to take the boat down the Han River. This poem also takes place in that same town, in its outskirts, in a mountain that might be close to it. So the topic of this poem is landscape description, a description of that mountain. It's not given with a lot of detail, but there is some description of that mountain and of the outing of Meng Haorang and his friends there. More than strictly a landscape poem, it's more of a landmark poem describing a famous site and the associations that it generates. It could also have an element of social poetry in that, but it doesn't really dwell on the details of the outing or of the friends enjoying each other's company while sightseeing. The poem starts with a philosophical note, which seems to give it a philosophical depth. That is the contrast between the stability of nature and the evanescence of individual humans and of human activity. Although, this is somewhat contrasted by the poem itself, as in the end it makes a reference to a historical figure which continues to be homaged and remembered, even though his time has passed. So, overall, as I said, you could say this is a landmark poem describing the natural surroundings of Mount Xian, its cultural and natural background, but it has other reverberations as well. So it fits with Meng Haoran's poems, although, as we said, the stereotypical Meng Haoran poem is, more of a description of the virtue and the pleasures of the retired life in the mountains and forests. So as usual, let's go couplet by couplet, commenting on this poem. First couplet. In the world of men, nothing stays unchanged. From ancient times until today, there's always flux. So the first poem doesn't start talking to us about the expedition to Mount Xian. It positions us on a more generic philosophical point of view, which is human ephemerality, the impermanency of the human sphere and of human activities and human achievements. So this is a very common topic, especially I imagine among Taoists and Buddhists. So it fits Meng Haoran well. So the world of men is changeable. Dynasties come and go, men die, institutions change. It says, from ancient times until today, there's always flux. There's no stability. Human society and human lives are marked by change, by perpetual and continual change. Isn't there anything stable, anything that outlasts, anything permanent? Well, yes, there is. the next couplet will introduce us, and it's nature in general, and this mountain specifically in detail. So the second couplet, the first of the parallelistic couplets. But rivers and mountains never lose their splendor. Like those who came before, we're moved to visit them. So in contrast with the human realm, the social realm of mutability, evanescence, and disappearance, nature remains stable. Now, this is paradoxical because nature has a need to renew itself every year. So you could say that flowers are more ephemeral than men as they last a season. But the cycle of the seasons repeats ever again. The trees, the same trees, get leaves and flowers again. And of course, then there are more stable elements in nature, like the mountains and rivers, which last for geological ages, you could say. So rivers and mountains never lose their splendor. They don't fade away, or at least not as easily as humans in their achievements. Yeah? And in the past, men have come to visit natural places, and now in the present, we're doing the same thing. We continue this human tradition of visiting landmarks, natural landmarks. So the next couplet, in fact, the next couple of couplets is going to describe the nature and the sights in Mount Xian. Third couplet, which is the second parallelistic couplet. Past rapids, fish in shallows near a bridge, a cold sky, the depths of young men swamp. So we get a bird's eye view of the landmarks that Meng Haoran and his friends see while climbing the Mount Xian. They go past rapids, they can see fish in the shallows near a bridge, they can look up and see a cold sky, they can look far away into the Jungmen swamp, which has appeared already in some of the poems we've read, including the previous one by Meng Haoran, the Jungmen marshes. And so different natural phenomena that can be seen, that can be appreciated from Mount Xian. Finally, the last couplet includes the objective. We were moving past rapids, fish in shallows near a bridge, and so on. But where are we going to? This couplet will tell us, and it will conclude with adding a human element and also a social element, and take us back to the feelings of Meng Haoran and his mountain climbing friends. So, to the stone monument for the Duke of Yang, reading the inscription, our sleeves are wet with tears. So it seems that nature, in spite of what the poem has been saying, was not the complete, was not the final objective after all. And it seems that in spite of what the poem says about nothing staying unchanged in the world of men, some things seem to be at least remembered and honored, done by men, even with the passage of time. What the different friends want to view, and the final point they reach, is the stone monument for the Duke of Yang. Now, the Duke of Yang refers to Yang Hu. He's a historical figure from the early Western Jin period, so the 3rd century of the Common Era. At the time when northern and southern China were still divided, but were about to be unified. So Yang Hu was the governor of the town of Xiangyang for the Jin dynasty that had just usurped the imperial throne in the north. And this Yang Hu was a very loyal and a very efficient minister who didn't live to see the unification of the country, but who worked through his kindness and goodness to the local population, and through convincing the neighbors of the other southern state of the virtue of his rule to accept the rule of the conquest of the Jin dynasty. So he was honored after his death with aristocratic titles and a shrine and probably a stone monument near to where he had ruled in this Mount Xian. The inscriptions is still there 300 years, more than 300, 400 years after the events. Meng Haoran and his friends, after climbing the mountain, read the inscription, which I imagine contains the noble deeds and the praise for this noble minister who did so much good for his sovereign, but also for the common people. And this event from the past, this noble minister, his deeds, the gratitude of the people and of the sovereign. This makes Meng Haoran and his friends cry. So there's the stereotypical, our sleeves are wet with tears. They cry a lot. I don't know the contents of the inscription, as I said, but I imagine it would be a panegyric to the virtues and the good rulership and loyalty of Yang Hu. Why would this specially move Meng Haoran and his friends? I imagine the contents of this inscription would be a model for scholar officials. They would say, aha, here we have a model, an example to imitate, an imperishable model of one in a chain of the virtuous scholar officials who have ruled the land from the remote past until now. Okay, Meng Haoran took the examinations. We might imagine that his friends who climbed the mountain are scholar officials. But remember that, for the most part, Meng Haoran plays the persona of somebody who does not willingly decide to follow the path of the scholar officials. So, I don't know, it's curious. It makes me think. Generally, I find this a poem quite rife with contradictions. Yeah? So in the world of men, nothing stays unchanged. But the good model set 400 years ago by this man and the inscription about his deeds remains unchanged, and it continues to move in the same way, the people of the present, as opposed to the people of the past. So, okay, interesting poem, a bit contradictory. I am not sure. I imagine it is an objective of the poem, perhaps, but I'm not sure how much of an objective this self-contradiction is an objective in these lines by Meng Haoran. But anyway, it's interesting.